Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Matthew Dickerson. Tech Talk. Sit back and relax. It's time to talk technology.
Hello, tech boffins, gadget specialists, tinkerers, and egghead engineers, one and all. Welcome to your sanctuary. Welcome to Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Come on in, get comfortable, but clear a space for the bloke with his finger planted squarely on the pulse of anything and everything born of the cleverest minds of the planet. Welcome to the microphone, Matthew Dickerson.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you very much. That's a wonderful introduction. So this week I want to talk about a little interesting experiment, maybe the right word. I think it's going to be more than an experiment because it's going to work, hopefully, from day one.
No, but that's still an experiment.
Yeah, fair enough.
And we don't judge experiments whether they worked or not. They just supply us evidence.
Well, this one needs to work, okay?
Right, okay. All right, okay.
This is an experiment that's got a positive outcome.
Okay. Moving on.
So there's a little fundraiser that I've been involved with for a number of years. And they had a concept many years ago where they ran a radiothon, a bit like the old telethons you'd see on TV. They'd have a bunch of people on TV and people would ring in and they'd pledge money and they'd fundraise all day.
Yeah, I remember those.
Yeah, they ran one of these on the radio station years ago and they dedicated the whole day. The radio station was very generous. People would ring in, they'd say, yes, I'll bid $100 for dinner with James Eddy, and away they'd go and they'd have different products. And it seemed like a successful day and they raised a bunch of money on the day. So they talked to me about doing one of these again. And I thought, well, that sounds fantastic, but it seems a bit old-fashioned to have some operators waiting by the phone with their pencil in hand. Oh, yes, Billy just rang in and he pledged this much money on this particular item.
Very 80s, isn't it?
It does seem like that. And I said, surely we can do something a bit more modern. So we've teed up a auction site. Now, there are charity auction sites that will do live auctions in a room where you can bid online. So the experiment part is the companies that I have dealt with before to do this have never done a radiothon type auction before. They're typically designed to be in a room and people are using their phones to put bids on various items, and we have screens around the room that show off these various items. And that goes for 3 or 4 hours. This is going to be a whole day. This is going to be people being pushed on the radio to go and bid for items or pledge money, but then they're going to go to their phones or their computers to do it. I think it'll work really well. I'm hoping it'll work really well. There's no reason why it shouldn't work really well because hopefully people get excited on the radio.
Yeah.
I'll go to that site. There'll be a URL dedicated to it. You'll go to that site and I like the look of that. I'll bid for that. It might be a holiday. It might be a toaster. It might be a 3 years worth of fuel, whatever. The various sort of things you'd see at a normal charity auction. But I just like the idea of using modern tools to be able to do something that's an old-fashioned concept like a radiothon. I'm sure they had radiothons going 100 years ago. Ring in and make your pledge and we'll raise some money for something. But I just hope the modern twist on it works just as well, because I'm hoping it'll work better because you're not limited by the number of people getting into the phone.
That's right.
Or the manual process. Oh, no, that's just been outbid. Hold on, I took a phone call on that item. So that manual process will be removed and the online auction concept will just be basically, yep, there's another bid. Oh, you've just been outbid, and you receive text messages when you've been outbid, so you know to go and rebid for that. And then at the end of the day, we hit, say, 6 o'clock. Okay, radio's finished. All those auctions are done. You've just won something whether you want it or not. And by the way, we've got your credit card details, so you'll be charged for it immediately. So a normal auction, you're chasing people up for weeks afterwards. Hey, James, you said you do that. Oh, yep, I'll drop that money into you. Yeah, it can take a while to chase us up. So it's happening in about a month's time.
Watch your space, and we'll this is a 2-part introduction.
Obviously.
We'll get the results in a couple of weeks' time, I guess.
See how it goes.
Excellent. All right, well, let's talk about what's on today's episode. We're going to be talking about 3D printed buildings. They're on the up and up, and we'll just see how far up in a few short minutes. And in an uncharacteristic move, we're providing a little hope for the ice drivers of the world. There's a little hope in the air there. Let it be known that we have something for everyone here at Tech Talk. Now, who dominates the ping pong table at your place? Get ready to make way for the ping pong robot. But let's kick off with a story born from a very savvy brewer. Now, I don't know about you, but when I need to choose the perfect wine, I always turn to a trusted sommelier. Sadly, though, LeMichael knows nothing about beer, which beer is best for a Saturday afternoon, and I just don't have a good Cicerone in my contact list. Now, side note, for those new money listeners, a Cicerone is an expert on beers, if I can just spell that out for you. Now, Matt, in the absence of a qualified Cicerone, is there any other option for my desperate plight of which beer to have on a Saturday afternoon?
There is, and this all comes back to a major first world problem.
Yeah.
You walk into a pub.
Not enough sommeliers or Cicerones.
That's two other problems as well. But the real problem is when you walk into a pub, in particular a pub you haven't been to before or recently even, and you look at the taps behind the bar to see the labels that are the beers on tap, and you go, I'm not familiar with all of those. Which beer am I going to have?
So you go with the best label.
Well, possibly. There's a whole range of... that might work for you. That might work for other people. They might say to the barman, which do you recommend? But there's nothing worse. Well, probably are things worse, but in first world problems...
First world problems,
that's
there's
right.
nothing worse.
You order a beer that you're not familiar with and you go, I'll give that one a go because I like the label or the barman said so or for whatever reason. And you pay a lot of money for a beer these days. You get the beer and you sit down, you take a taste and you go, you know what?
I don't like that beer.
Exactly. But what do you do then? I've paid for it.
Yeah.
I don't want to just cast it aside.
Finish the whole
I've got to finish
thing.
it. That's right. That's the problem. So you finish that whole beer and then what do? You go to the bar and try a different one. Now, we're not recommending excessive drinking here, of course, but sometimes you might try a few. Of course, the solution to all of this is an app. Surely there's an app for that. That's a common statement that I've heard people say. And most of the time I say, yes, there is an app for that without any knowledge whether there's an app for that because there's a lot of apps out there. So now there is an app to help you try it. There's a couple of limitations on this, but they're only early limitations. The first problem we've got is that this new app is called Joey and it's developed by Lion, the beer maker called Lion. Now, at this stage, they only have Lion beers on the app, of course.
So it's just a marketing tool.
It's a marketing tool.
Which Lion beer do I want this Saturday
Correct.
afternoon?
So it's not which beer, it's which Lion beer. Now, that's okay because it's early stages. And again, I think that when someone's got this app and they go, this is okay for Lion beers, but why don't we have it for every beer? Absolutely. There's an app right there and someone's probably already working on that app right now. But the cool part is you put in some basic components of your beer preference. What alcohol content do I want? Do I want full strength? Do I want half strength? Do I want no strength in there? What sort of bitterness do I like? What sort of flavour profile? You put in a few basic components and also other beers that you might like. And then the app does its AI magic and says, right, when you walk into that pub, take a photo of the taps, and AI doesn't care whether they're pretty or not. They just analyse what's there. And then you say, with my flavour profile, what should I choose out of those Lion beers? And it will say, here's the perfect Lion beer for you. Or it also might say, well, actually, none of the beers on tap here suit your
somewhere
preference.
else.
Exactly right. It just so happens 100 metres down the road
Is
you've
the
got,
Lion Brewery.
well, there you go. The whole brewery. You've got another pub that might have exactly what you would like to choose. Now, at this stage, Lion have designed this for mainly internal use. They want their salesmen or sales staff to go out there and look at what beers are on tap in pubs and say you need a better range. You only have this type of beer catered for. So internal. But again, internal and then just Lion is the first couple of steps, or in my mind, the first couple of steps to then saying, here's an app that has all beers on it and away you go. Choose your perfect beer.
Now, from my experience of beer drinking, there are a lot of people out there, there are a lot of hipsters out there who like their artisan beers and whatnot, and so I think they can get right into this. But then there's your common bloke who just likes his beer and he's got his favourite label and that's what he goes for. So I think it's a shot in the dark for that one.
It is, yeah.
Well,
when I turned 18 and we were allowed to drink alcohol in 18, of course, in Australia, there was two choices. You had VB or Tui's. That was it. And in fact, there were some pubs that you'd go to that you knew were a Tui's pub or a VB pub. You had to drink Tui's when you went to that. So I find it quite amusing when I walk into a pub now and I look at all these different labels behind the bar and I don't, where's my Tui's or VB? They're not there. There's so many other choices there.
Yeah, and you say, can I just get a Tui's? And they go, well, I'm going to have to go down to the cellar and see if we've got some at the back.
Or normally you get a strange look. What do you mean a Tui's? You know, there's something that might look like a Tui's, but yeah, certainly it's a different world now. So we are getting better with AI helping us in the real world, because this is again taking some AI and some information in the background and have some real world experiences that are better for us. Well, better, I suppose that's better, isn't it? You're not wasting money on beers you don't like. But I think there's a whole range of things we're going to see AI helping us make choices.
That's right, making your selections. Yeah. Now, from the files of nifty tech gadgets that you never thought you'd ever need, let me introduce you to battery-operated palm coolers. palm coolers, folks. Matt, somebody found a problem that I never knew existed. What's all this about?
Well, before we start the story, I just want to give our listeners a challenge. Just sometime in the next day, even week if you like, I just want you to slip into casual conversation glabrous skin. Now, I had never heard the term glabrous skin until I researched this story.
Your skin's looking very glabrous this morning.
Well, that might be an issue if it is, because glabrous skin is hairless skin.
Yeah.
So the palms of our hands, the soles of our feet, for example, they're both examples of glabrous skin. So just casually slip in glabrous skin into those conversations, like Gert. I like to slip in Gert in casual conversations. So it's an interesting one. So in this particular example, we've got a device that you can hold in the palm of your hand, and because it's in touch with the glabrous skin, it's a great place to change our body temperature, cool or heat our body temperature. Now, this particular device, the nice Rocc palm cooling device, is designed to lower our body temperature, and the palm of our skin or the palm of our hand is the perfect place to do it.
Right.
This little device gets down to around about 10 degrees Celsius. You hold onto it and it cools you down. Designed for athletes, designed for hot temperatures. So you do a workout, and after that workout, you hold onto this. Or it might be for athletes that are on and off the field. So when you're on the interchange bench, to cool your body temperature down to get ready to go for your next bit of activity, you hold onto one of these devices to just get your body temperature down, your core temperature down, to cool you down. You think standing in front of a fan might be nice to cool you down, lots of blood goes through our head, but this is a really effective way with a small device to try and cool us down.
So when the air conditioning's not working in the office or whatever,
get your glabrous skin.
Yeah. Put your soles of your feet and your palms of your hand on something cold.
That's right. Now,
there you go.
How this works, I was fascinated to look at what the technology was behind how this works, because with something like a refrigerator or reverse cycle air conditioning, we know we've got a compressor, we know we've got a pump in there that's actually generating cool air, taking the heat out of the air, if you like. And I'm thinking to myself, how are you going to get a little compressor on a device that's small enough to hold in the palm of your hand? Of course, it doesn't use a compressor. It uses the Peltier effect, and that's basically when you've got two semiconductors, one side will get, and you run electricity between those two semiconductors, one side will get cold, one side will get hot, so you get a temperature differential. The great part about it is you don't need a compressor, you don't need the noise of a compressor, you don't need the gas in a compressor like you do with, say, a refrigerator, so you can cool things down.
Just need a flow of electrons.
Yeah, that's right. So you've got, in this particular device, obviously batteries and the flow of electrons, the right semiconductors, and you can get that down, as I said before, to 10 degrees Celsius, so it's pretty cool.
Wow.
Now, I then thought, well, why wouldn't you use the Peltier effect in lots of devices rather than using a compressor? Because a compressor is noisy and it obviously eventually loses gas when you finally get a leak in the system. But a refrigerator system with a compressor is very efficient. The Peltier effect is not really that efficient in the whole scheme of things. So great for portability, great for something that's small and easy to use, but not great for a refrigerator. So this will give you about 2 hours on a single charge to cool you down in that process. So quite fascinating. I do wonder whether you would get to the point where if you're doing an endurance event, say a marathon, when you're generating a lot of heat in your body, with something like this, but I think the extra weight that you would carry in holding on to this might basically be detrimental to your performance as opposed to how much it might cool you down. So it really seems to be designed for you do some activity and then stop and hold on to this to cool you down before your next bit of activity, or even just recovering afterwards, reduce the lactic acid build-up, that sort of thing.
I was just thinking of fielding in the outfield in cricket on a 42-degree day. Thinking,
and probably right, and then you drop it when you go running after the ball. So, yeah, that's right. But gee, look at there in the outfield, James is looking good. He must be taking advantage of his glabrous skin. So,
but then it occurred to me that, okay, you have your drinks break and then you go and get a cold drink. You're holding onto a cold drink in your hand.
Yeah, well, that's true too, and it does feel nice, doesn't it?
Down.
Yeah.
Anyway, I've just learned something awesome and new. Thank you very much. E-scooters have become something of a phenomenon in recent years. They were very much a novelty on the streets once upon a time, but now some models are touted as a legitimate form of commuting. And that means there's a definite niche in the market and a little more impetus for the engineers to fill these babies brimful with technology. So, Matt, what does the average e-scooting commuter have to look forward to in the Segway Ninobot?
Well, the Segway, and the Segway brand is such a great brand.
Yeah.
I don't actually know when it was, 2002 maybe, when they brought out their first side-by-side wheel device.
Yeah. And they were just such an odd sort of thing to look at.
They were, and the reason I guess that date is I was in America in the early 2000s at a Microsoft conference, And at one of the stands, and people spend a lot of money on their stands at a Microsoft conference, 15,000 people there from around the world. And I saw a Segway, and I went over to the guy and said, I've got to have a ride of that. I've heard about these things. He thought, we can't do that. There's no insurance and all the rest of this sort of stuff. And I said, how about if I come back at the end of the session when the whole thing's closed down? He went, oh, okay. So I got to have a ride on this thing. And I just found it fascinating that you stood on this thing with wheels side by side and it didn't fall over. And so most people have ridden a Segway by now. They've been around for a long time. But that technology is fantastic. So they're actually getting into scooters, into the scooter market. So not the side-by-side market as such, these normal inline scooters. And their latest version is absolutely something you could use for a commute. If you lived in a very heavily congested city, a LA or a Sydney or a Tokyo, then the traffic on the roads crawls. You're not unusual to sit in traffic still, or maybe going like 10 or 20 kilometres an hour. So if you could get something that could go along, probably not legally on the footpaths or maybe not legally on the roads either, but if you could get something that does 25 kilometres an hour and it's got a range of 80 kilometres per charge, then suddenly you go, well, that sounds like a pretty good way to get to work and back. And that's exactly what this Segway can do. So 80 kilometres per range. It's got a 2,000 watt motor, which sounds like fantastic for some acceleration, but also just to get to hills. Sometimes when I've ridden e-scooters, you go along the flat fine, but you get a bit of a hill and it struggles to get up the hill.
And you're better off walking?
Sometimes, yeah, it might be a commentary on my weight more than the actual Segway or the e-scooter itself. But top speed of 25 kilometres an hour, charges up in about 2.5 hours. So even if you lived a fair way from work, if you had to commute a fair way, you could plug it in and charge it up quite quickly. But what I love about it, they've got to the point now where they've got full hydraulic suspension on it. Wow. So you're getting a smoother ride. The wheels have increased in size to 11 inch. So some of those bumps and some of the curbs where you might have a bit of a lip there, they might struggle a bit on small wheels, whereas a decent-sized wheel, 130 kilo payload, so that presumably that's a big person, but presumably if you've got yourself and maybe a backpack or maybe some groceries or whatever it might be, so pretty practical. And then you've got a full-colour LCD display, shows your speed, your battery charge, the mode you're in, sports mode, etc., what time it is, and even a call display. So if a call comes in, of course, you can see that, and then you've got a map on there as well. The one thing I really like about it is they've integrated this with the Apple Find My feature. So now when you pull up your phone, if you're using an iPhone, you can see your phone, you can see your iPad, you can see your AirPods, you can see your scooter all there right. on your Find My. So if someone steals it, you can track it down and tell the police exactly where it is. So it sounds pretty impressive. Headlight, side deck underglow, traction control. What? Really? Traction control?
Yeah, right. Well, when you're heading down those footpaths, you need to have good grip, don't you?
You do need to have good grip. And then one thing I found fascinating was they've replaced the electronic horn with a good old-fashioned bell. And I must when I'm riding my bike around our cycleway, I've got the loudest horn I could possibly get, and you hit that a few times, and people just don't turn around, don't see you coming still, or don't hear you coming. And I think part of it is it's just a foreign sound. I need a horn, a really loud horn that sounds like a bell, and they've gone back to a traditional bell. So e-scooters are still illegal in New South Wales, here in Australia. They're legal in some states in various forms, but I think this is going to change. I mean, there are dangers with e-scooters, but surely there's dangers with everything we do, so you just need to be sensible about it. But it's a pretty easy way to commute around, I think.
It'll be interesting to see how this all evolves, yeah. The building revolution continues to roll on, and by that I mean the 3D printed building revolution. And adding to the excitement, new records in this field of design and construction keep being set. Matt, what's the latest in 3D printed concrete structures?
How do you go for a 30-metre tower?
30-metre tower. So that's got to be 4 or 5 stories,
That's
isn't
not too bad, is it?
Yeah.
So we know we've done good work around the world with 3D printed housing. That's pretty impressive. I've actually been to a construction site where they were doing a 2-story 3D printed house.
Right.
And so that looked pretty cool because what they did was they printed the ground floor as per normal. They set up a gantry and away the printer went. And I love watching it. It's mesmerising watching a 3D printer just running around the corners and everything's curved and round and just keep building layer upon layer. And so after they built the first level, they then put a slab in as the floor of the second level, and then they just basically moved the gantry up to that next level and did the same again. Yeah, so that was pretty cool. This one's been done a little bit different, where they basically 3D printed the 124 individual elements. So basically print a floor or a section of the floor and then put it together, stitch it together as such. But it's still an incredibly efficient way to do it. They used two robotic systems. One was doing the extrusion of the concrete, and the other one, and when I've seen 3D printed housing, there'll be someone going along and putting in some reinforcements and tying them together, tying the levels together manually. But this had one robotic arm that would actually do that for the person. So you could sit back literally and not touch it while it printed the various layers out that they needed, including the little bits of reinforcement between them. They took approximately 10 weeks to do the whole structure, which for a 30-metre tower sounds pretty impressive. Now, obviously, if you had a 30-metre tower that had 100 square metres per floor or 10 square metres per floor, that's a little bit different. This is only fairly small, but it still shows off what you can do with 3D printing. We know in Australia, and I assume in many parts of the world, you've got a housing crisis, not enough houses for all the people we need to house. But here in Australia, we're just starting to get into that 3D printed solution. But I think that can be a solution, printing things quickly and getting them built to a very high standard in a short period of time.
But if we're talking about surface area on the floor, as this becomes more common, there's no reason why you couldn't have several gantries working in tandem. And so you could be still looking at a similar sort of build time, even for the big buildings.
Yeah. So you're absolutely spot on. I think the potential for 3D printing is limitless in terms of what we can do. Exactly like you say, multiple gantries on one level and just away you go, print.
Yeah.
And realistically, as long as you keep feeding the concrete to it, then that can just keep printing and printing. You don't have a bunch of brickies saying it's time for smoko or it's dark now, I can't keep going. They can just keep going 24 hours a day. So it really can be an efficient way of doing it. But the precision is something that's impressive as well. And even in this particular structure, they said that the lattice-like form they built this in, which allowed for light penetration and some nice aesthetics there, that sort of precision wouldn't have been possible. Not would have been difficult, not would have been time-consuming, would not have been possible with traditional building methods, because it just does keep building layer upon layer. And I've talked to some architects at a university that are pretty excited about 3D printing because in the past, one of the limitations, one of the frustrations for an architect was they could draw these wonderful pictures, but they had to draw it being practical, knowing that someone had to build this thing. Yeah. And the best example I can think of is the Opera House, where it was a wonderful design built, and then, hold on, how do we make this thing stand up?
Make this work.
That's right.
Yeah.
And 3D printing takes away a bit of that because you can just do structures that are different, more precision. And the other part is that architects love to have curves. But builders hate curves because normally you've got a straight run of concrete or bricks or straight run of timber, and you want me to curve that. And my dad was a builder. I know.
How do you measure to the corner?
Oh, that's right. So my dad, I know he did some really tricky things in terms of building things where there were curves involved. I remember talking to him as a kid, and he would talk about the difficulty in terms of building these things that people wanted with these various curves. And it was just so much easier with straight lines. Whereas now you don't want a straight line because you want the gantry to keep flowing. And so you've got these beautiful curves you can make. So 30-metre tower today, is it at the point where it's a bit like the revolution that occurred when we discovered with skyscrapers that you didn't need to have timber to build a tall building? Concrete and steel were the ways to suddenly shoot up into the air. Is this what's going to happen with this? I'm not sure that, I mean, we've got pretty tall towers now, but I'm not sure if it's really a revolution in terms of the height or the revolution in terms of the speed and convenience. I think that's more where it's at.
Speed that we can put these things up. Yeah.
And so many big buildings are built as cookie cutters. You know, each floor is built to be the same because it's easy and convenient for a builder to say, I'm going to have a 20-storey building and every floor is going to be identical, so I just go and order 150 of this that I need and 150 of that. That makes sense and it's efficient. With 3D printing, you just put a new design, new floor, gantry goes up to that level. Right, we're going to do this design for this floor, and it doesn't matter if it's different to the previous one, so you get that individuality.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
It's exciting.
Type 2 diabetes is an epidemic in the Western world, probably the whole globe, you might even say or argue. You'd be hard-pressed to find a medico to disagree now that the stats are 1 in 10 in the population with diabetes and the costs soaring to hundreds of billions of dollars each year. But an ounce of prevention goes a long way, as we all know, and there's a big market for technology to track blood sugar levels in non-diabetics, Matt.
Yeah, and there's a whole range of things. This whole wearables market, and this is a different bit of wearables market. This is getting under your skin wearables market. So I'm not sure if you're still wearing it when it goes underneath your skin, but let's call it wearables for the moment. But this whole market's exploded, and I've talked about it before. when I used to do things and try and track what I was doing, I used to have this big chunky thing I put on my shoulder. That was my GPS unit, which would then tie to my watch to track how fast I was going, whether it was bike riding or running. I'd have a chest band on to check your heart rate. And you were pretty impressed the fact that you had a watch that could do heart rate and speed based on these other devices you attach to yourself. Our watch now is quite incredible. We've got our skin temperature, obviously heart rate, oxygen saturation, sleep quality, stress levels, VO2 max, ECGs, menstrual cycles. Doesn't work for me, but menstrual cycles can be tracked by your watch as well. Incredible with all the things that are there. And then you get to blood sugar levels, glucose levels in your blood. And so we haven't got there with a watch yet. So the watch can't do that. But these continuous glucose monitors are available for people with diabetes to track that and work out exactly what insulin and when you need insulin, which makes sense. But it's at the point now where average people without diabetes who just want to track their blood glucose levels can actually do it. These are over-the-counter devices, not approved yet in Australia, but approved by the FDA in America.
Right.
So you can walk up to a counter and say, I'll get me one of those CGMs, thanks. The typical ones at the moment clip onto the back of your arm on your tricep, and they obviously have to go through the skin, in the skin, to be able to monitor your blood sugar levels. And then they'll last for about 2 weeks and then feed that information through to your watch. 15-minute intervals. It'll give you updates in terms of what you've got there. Now, some of the medical experts are saying, just hold on a sec there. Your blood sugar levels do go up and down on average over the day. So
depending on how you're eating and
all that
your
sort of thing.
exercise and all that. Yeah.
Exercise, eating, sleeping, a whole range of things. But in terms of monitoring our health, it's not a bad indicator in terms of what we're doing. And we might learn a bit more about what we do. We might see a spike in our blood sugar after we have lunch. So maybe a 10-minute walk after lunch is good for us. Now, I'm not giving medical advice here. That's just me spitballing as such, but maybe that's the sort of thing you might do.
But recently I went into the doctor myself, and I'm now in a situation where I'm getting regular blood checks just to, test blood sugar levels and whatnot. And so that's happening. I'm at an age where I think it's probably important that I do keep a tab on that. But that requires a trip to the doctor and then a trip to the pathologist. And it's only sort of spasmodic. Whereas if I went to the doctor and he said, look, we're going to stick this on you for a week or so and just track you to see how you're going.
And when you have that test, and often you have to fast before you go to the pathologist and a whole range of things, but how was your sleep last night? Did you go for a run last night? What's all these other parameters for that one instant, that one moment in time when they test your blood? And again, it's a hassle. As I said, you go to the doctor to get the referral to the pathologist and then go back to the doctor to read the results. It's not a 5-minute process. And then the doctor looks at it and says, oh, James, actually, this looks a bit alarming here, but hold on, what did you do the night before? I can't remember now. That was a week ago. I had that blood test done. So you're right, having this, they actually do tie it up with your smart ring as well. So you can actually get readings that are comparing exercise, activity, food with your smart ring, with your blood sugar levels to give you a bit more insight into exactly what's happening in your body. So it does sound fascinating. And I think it's fairly well known across the world that we're getting unhealthier. So I find it fascinating that we're getting better at tracking just how unhealthy we are. I'm not sure that it's actually delivered a lot of change in society yet, though. But maybe it will. Maybe we'll start getting this.Maybe if an AI says, James, stop eating all that sugar, then maybe you'll listen more than if your wife says, James, stop eating all that sugar. What does
AI know? What has AI ever done for anyone? But 1 in 10 people in the population with diabetes. I think this is that's alarming. That's
it is alarming. So I'm not giving you investment advice here, but this whole market's exploding. Last year, the wearable market was worth $84 billion US. By 2030, it's expected to be worth $186 billion. Wow. And that's as we get more devices, as we talk about the smart rings, we've talked about those before, wearables like this or under-the-skin wearables, a whole range of things that we're monitoring about our bodies. It's just fascinating. So hopefully they'll come to Australia. I'd love to try one out just as an experiment to see how it goes. I'm not particularly worried about my blood sugar levels, but maybe it's a good idea to have a look at that.
Yeah. Okay, here's a story to get the ICE vehicle drivers, those internal combustion engine vehicle drivers, excited. Up to this point, we've been dragging fuel out from its peaceful hidey hole deep under the ground and then just burning it, sending all the products into the air. And it's caused quite a number of environmental problems on a global scale. But what if the fuel didn't have to come from crude oil? What if it could be dragged from the thin air? After all, the products are simply carbon dioxide and water. What if you could reclaim that from the thin air and we just reverse the reaction, Matt?
It sounds too good to be true. It sounds like fairy dust being sprinkled on something and making magic happen.
Well, in chemistry, we talk about combustion is not a reversible reaction. You know, it's that's what we've. But we're about to learn something.
Yeah, that's right. So if you want to look it up, there's a US-based startup called Archela, Aircela, Archela maybe, Aircela. And so they've got a machine that's about the size of a fridge. That's the new measurement in volume,
Standard
obviously. Yeah, so
machine measurement.
That's right, standard fridge size. So it's the size of a fridge, and it synthesises usable petrol from the air. So we've heard about direct air capture devices before. We've seen them set up in various countries to try and take CO2 out of the air. But typically those air capture devices are taking that and then burying it or getting it out of the atmosphere, not really doing anything else with it once they've captured it. But this device does that, captures CO2 directly from the atmosphere, then it uses water, and logically you would use renewable energy. So it does use power. But if you're just burning coal to give you power to do this process, you've kind of defeated the purpose of it all. So you use renewable energy, and it takes that, as you say, it's a combination of CO2 and air and oxygen, and you basically reverse that process and you end up with fuel. So this device, this refrigerator-sized device, will produce about 4 litres of petrol in a day. So not a huge amount, but it's only a small device. You can imagine if you had something a bit bigger than that, or maybe a few of these, and had it at your house, what's the
you'd only need to say one at your house. How long does a tank of fuel last you? And so how big's a tank of fuel? And maybe, you know, so 4 litres over a day, so over an entire week, you're getting 28 litres. At least that's maybe, you know, for some people, a third of a tank, maybe half a tank for a small car.
And depending how far you're travelling each day, if you're just doing a small commute each day, that might be fine. And if not, you might put a couple of these devices in and say, that's where I produce my petrol from. I've now got that where I'm basically refueling from home, and it's costing me whatever the device cost me plus my renewable energy, my solar panels on the roof of my house. So what's fascinating, and I started trying to think about this process. So we burn petrol that comes from fossil fuels, and we've now got extra CO2 in the air. Too much of that, as we know, is bad. So we then take some back out. Great, we've just done some direct air capture, and we've put it back into fuel, into a liquid, so it's not in the air anymore. And then we burn that again, and we end up with it back in the air.
So it's just part of the carbon cycle. Yeah,
but at least it's not taking more. It's not putting more.
Yeah, we're not putting more from stuff that was hidden under the ground and putting that into the air.
So it's not going to solve our climate change problem, but it's not going to add to it as well.
That's right.
So it might be a good stopgap measure where we say, okay, we're not increasing the amount of CO2 in the air, we're leaving it at the same level, and now let's take other measures to try and reduce it in other areas. So it might be a good transition phase to go from where we are now through to basically getting to the point where we're driving more EVs. So in America, 28% of all US greenhouse gases come from emissions, from vehicle emissions. Most of those are obviously cars. There's some trucks, etc. on the road, but just the sheer volume of cars. So if we could reduce that 28% down to near zero by producing all your fuel in this sort of way with direct air capture, it sounds too good to be true. There's obviously a bit of work in manufacturing all these devices, and logically you would try and go for scale rather than say, let's have every household with a refrigerator-sized unit. Why don't we just go and build some big manufacturing processes somewhere? But it sounds like a great solution. And I haven't heard of this before. I haven't heard of let's get away from crude oil and let's produce our petrol in some other way.
Yeah. So, well,
I mean,
watch this space, folks.
I wonder how ICE drivers feel about this, because some ICE drivers love the idea of burning their oil, but they also want to burn their coal. They don't want wind turbines. So producing petrol in this way, but still using wind turbines or solar to produce the power to produce the petrol. Oh, now they're all confused.
It's a bit of a running gag. Out of any possible career choice, the job of a weatherman comes with the very least level of accountability, you'd have to say. The very least amount of trust. We accept that daily forecasts come with an unspoken disclaimer. Each weather report probably should end up with a big old yeah and a shoulder shrug, you know what I mean? Current weather forecasting methods require supercomputers with enormous processing power because there's just so much information they've got to process. Or do they, Matt?
Well, that's been the logic in the past. And I love how weather forecasters are so confident. Tomorrow, the temperature will be 28 degrees. There'll be a northerly of 15 kilometres an hour, and there's no rain forecast. They say it with such authority, you think you're hearing it from a doctor or some respected physicist.
Yeah, but any thinking person in the chair is going, yeah, I'm not putting money on it.
So, and I think they're getting better from my experience.
Definitely getting better. Yeah,
getting better for short term.
Yes.
I typically find if I'm going outside to do something active like riding my bike, I reckon if I look at the wind speed for the next day and the temperature, I reckon I'm confident they're going to be close-ish. But 2 days out, not so much.
Yeah.
So short term is getting better. But the way they do that, as you said, is with supercomputers. They've got a whole bunch of data they feed into those. You've got information from satellites, from ships, from balloons. You've got ground sensors. You feed all this information in, and then you've got this whole bunch of random variables that can happen in the weather system. It's complicated. The Earth's complicated. All the different energy that's coming into the Earth and the different
we need
systems.
to be fair to weathermen. They work very hard.
They do.
Weather people, I should say. They work very hard, and they are processing a lot of stuff. And there's a lot of things that can change what they're doing. But
so you tie up some time on a supercomputer, you feed it petabytes, literally petabytes of data, and then you get something that's, okay-ish. But AI has said, let's look at this in a different way. Let's not look at all of that. I don't need that much data. I just need a few components to be able to make some estimations on and see how I go. So they tested 4 AI models, and they compared those to the same data, same information out of a supercomputer with lots of data, and they found that the weather predictions were about the same. So
there you go.
The exciting part about this is it basically takes away the few agencies across the world that basically have the weather forecasting. People talk to me about their favourite site that they use to go to get their weather, and I've said to most people, let's look up where that data comes from, and typically they're getting it from the same source. So the different ones, it's just a prettier interface, basically one over another. But this would really democratise weather forecasting, because they're saying that some of these models just need a basic laptop, a few bits of information that's readily available, and that can predict the weather with basically the same accuracy as these complicated systems.
There you go.
So that sounds pretty exciting. There is a bit of a concern that then it's going to be taken away from some of these large agencies and then in the hands of the big tech giants, the Google, the Microsoft, the NVIDIA, and they could monopolise forecasting because they say, hold on, we're running the AI tools now. You don't need supercomputers, you need super AI to manage that. But I think it's just getting to the stage where we're seeing that patterns that, and I've talked about it a lot before, we as humans might be able to see some basic patterns in things, but we just don't have so much data sitting behind us. AI, where its great strength is, it can have some of this data, and it's nothing for it to have a huge amount of data, and then it can make some estimations based on what it's seen in the past. So when I've seen these 3 parameters go like this, in the past, 18 million bazillion examples that I've looked at, this is what comes out of that. So I reckon the same thing's going to happen, and that's really what it's doing in this case. It's just looking at past examples of certain parameters and making predictions based on that. So it's quite fascinating. Where will it end for AI, James? Where will it end?
It doesn't.
It doesn't. That's right.
Now, seasoned travellers know that these days language is no barrier, now that most language translation apps work in real time, of course. The question is, though, is it even worth learning a second language anymore, Matt?
Well, I actually think no, but there are some experts who think yes.
There are some purists who think, no, there's something about the way it stimulates the brain too.
Well, that's exactly right. And I know my brother, when he was going on an overseas trip at one stage, he went and learnt the basics of that language and spent a bit of time doing all that. Oh, that's a great idea. And the next time I was going overseas, I thought I'll do the same thing. And I sat down to do it and I went, you know what, this is going to take a bit of time. And some of these translation apps, they're pretty impressive. They get it pretty well right most of the time. And you can have a stilted conversation with some sort of tool. So is it worth doing it anymore? And this is where the experts are arguing. So probably the biggest problem you see with some of the translation apps and with AI being used is AI doesn't really get nuance, doesn't really get emotion, and doesn't get interpretation. How many times have we read the instructions on some sort of manual that's been built overseas and we read it and we have a bit of a chuckle because it's not logical English, or there'll be some interpretation or some sort of language phrase that's either a bit silly or a bit wrong or sometimes even a bit rude, and the translation the app doesn't realise that, and the person looking at it has no idea what they're reading. So there's still a place, and maybe as we go forward, there'll be fewer and fewer of those people. And I've used translators before when I've been on overseas trips, and even sometimes when we've had delegates come here to Australia, and it makes me laugh, but at least you can have the conversation. So sometimes you'll say a 20 or 30 second sentence, and the translator, the human translator, gives 3 words. And you go, did you say everything that I just said?
Yeah.
Oh, I summarised it. I took out the unimportant, but no, all of it was really important. But at least you can have that conversation. And similarly, sometimes you'll say something very short and the person gives a very long translation. What happened there? And they say, I was trying to explain what you meant because they don't get this particular part of it. So a really good translator has a bit of an understanding of the local culture and the local language and of the foreign culture and language, and so they can interpret those.
Well, hopefully also picks up the nuances of the emotion that you're putting forward too. It's not just information.
Yep. So Meta at the moment and Apple are doing the same thing. They're developing wearables. We talk about that wearables market, wearables that are real-time translation. And I think of Douglas Adams, of course, Hitchhiker's Guide with the Babel fish, where you put the Babel fish in your ear and that instantly allows you to listen and understand every language across the world. And obviously everyone has a Babel fish because everyone wants to be able to speak to each other. And it won't be that far away that I think we'll have wearables that will do that for us as well. And I love the idea of going somewhere where it's foreign to you and they're all chatting away to each other. And I think to myself, you know what? I'd love to be able to speak their language. And after they chat away, maybe they're saying something about me, maybe they're not, maybe I'm paranoid, but then just be able to start chiming in their language and they'll go, oh, whoops, we said that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's many movie scenes that do exactly that. But having a little device on your wrist that's giving you a real-time translation of what's being said, that'd be funny as well when you go,
cool.
So you just said that. So, yes, it's still worth learning a language. Maybe it stimulates the brain in different ways. Or can we go and solve world peace using that brain power for that instead of solving language problems? Not sure. Do we get to the stage where we get a universal language? That'd be my ultimate aim. I want everyone to drive on the same side of the road, not to have to drive on different sides of the road.
I just share with you, I just think I feel so lucky sometimes that I was born in an English-speaking culture because we talk about universal languages. English is not a universal language, but it's most commonly spoken around the world. And how difficult it is to learn for an adult.
Yeah.
Right,
yep.
So
because we've got some stupid rules with English.
We do have some ridiculous rules for English. So anything that has to translate things back into English, I take my hat off to it because it's well done them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Spelling and grammar, exactly right.
Table tennis has always been the greatest test of reflexes and precision hand-eye coordination. With that simple description, you'd be excused for thinking that surely this would be a sport where robots could totally excel. And you'd be 100% correct, man.
This is just getting us one step. You know my ultimate aim for Rosie the robot. If we can play ping pong against professionals, then surely we can have a robot that picks up the clothes off my floor. Surely.
It's got to be around the corner.
It has. So MIT engineers have said, let's have some fun with this. I love ping pong growing up. We used to have a table and you'd play the round robin game where you'd pick up the bat and play it on. You'd move to the next spot as you went around the table because there was too many of us just to play 4 in there and you'd play games against your parents trying to beat them. So I'm a big fan of ping pong. Small area, good fun game. But then you see it played at the Olympics and you go, that's not ping pong because they're standing 20 metres back with incredible accuracy.
It is ridiculous,
onto the table.
isn't it?
So some of those speeds that they will reach in terms of the return ball when they first hit it, obviously ping pong ball is not great for aerodynamics. It'll slow down, very low surface to weight ratio or very high surface to weight ratio and low surface to weight ratio. And so when they hit it, it might be 90 kilometres an hour off the bat. Obviously it slows down by the time it gets to the table. Yeah. But this particular little robot that MIT engineers have created can return balls up to around about 70 kilometres an hour, so not too far off some of those Olympic standards. It can react to balls coming in and getting it right about 88 to 89% of the time, so hovering around that. So it's returning no matter what.
Right.
So
that's headed to the Olympics.
That's not too bad, is it? And at this stage, it's basically a unit that clips on the end of the table. So if you're playing against it, you just aim at its spot where it clips on, but the next stage will have a robot that stands back one step back from the table. Maybe they'll get the stage where it stands 10 steps back from the table then. So getting to that stage where you're playing at that sort of Olympic standard, but it just gives you an idea of how we are getting closer and closer to being able to replicate humans. So we talk about it a lot. Humans are pretty clever. We can pick up a bat and we can play ping pong at a basic level without having any sort of training, high-level training, sort of computing power. To make this thing work, they needed 3 computers running in parallel to process images for a start, so it's
Yeah.
got cameras on there.
Yeah, it's got a...
Then it's got to estimate the ball position, because obviously it's no good looking at where the ball is now.
And moving, yeah.
It's
yeah.
moving with spin on it, so a good place will
Yeah.
use spin as well. And then it's got, so it's 3 computers, one to process the image, one to estimate the ball position, and one to then generate the motion command to be able to say to the robotic arm, the humanoid robotic arm, move to this spot here and hit the ball. So we do all that, James. We do that with our one little brain.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive. This
is.
thing needs 3 computers to be able to process all of that. And then the humanoid robotic arm has got 5 degrees of freedom, and it's got an adapted wrist to be able to hold onto a paddle and be able to move that to put spin on the ball as well. So all pretty impressive. So we go, wow, that's pretty impressive for a robot, but I can do all that. I'm better than a robot. Maybe I can't hit
And
the ball.
you can pick up clothes too.
That's right, occasionally. But maybe I can't hit the ball at 70 or 90 kilometres an hour, but I can do the basics of all of that. So I can see at tennis clubs, you see where they have a ball machine that spits out balls and you get to hit against a ball coming at you. But with something like, I've done the same with cricket. I used a bowling machine, so you sit there and you're playing, but you kind of know what's happening each time because you've set it to certain settings and speed, etc. But something like this, you could play a game against this. So you set up one of these and go, I'm going to go and play. And then, obviously, right, I'm at level 7 now. Let's turn on the robotic arm to level 8 and play at a high level game. It sounds like a bit of fun you could have there. I can see malls or arcade centres where they would have a ping pong robot playing against you. Yeah, I think that'd be pretty cool. Now, I'm sure MIT aren't designing this, or maybe they are, for the arcade market, but what are we going to be able to do? Are we going to be able to use this now for other things? And I think all of these different robots we see running in marathons, playing ping pong, in boxing matches, all the things we've talked about, it's all about developing the robotic skills to then get to the point finally where they can pick up clothes off the floor. Yeah.
That's it. That's the focus. And we'll know we've arrived when we can do that.
Exactly right.
And that is that for today, folks. The battery light indicator is flashing madly at us from the console, so we've only got seconds to tie this show up. Thanks for another cracking tech talk, Matt.
I'll go and jump on my Segway, get down to the pub really quick and pick out a nice beer to drink in moderation.
In moderation? Yeah, well, I reckon I'm just going to fold one side of the ping pong table up and see how that works still. Thank you for tuning in once again to Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Remember, TTWMD is the best way to stay up to date and give you all the best conversation starters for around the water cooler week after week. I'm your host, James Eddy, wishing you a happy and productive week until we meet again for the next episode. Until then, take care. We'll see you then.